Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to understand the difference between Sharpe ratio and Sortino ratio. If you haven't watched my video on Sharpe ratio, please watch it and then you're going to understand what we're doing here. So the difference between the two ratios is just that in case of Sharpe ratio, the standard deviation that we take of those deviations that were of the good months and bad months as well, but in case of Sortino ratio we only take the negative returns. Now let me explain it to you. See, if I draw a graph, let me just draw a straight line. Okay, understand this. This is my returns, this is my year, so 2010 to dot 2020. This is my average return. Okay, now my average return is rupees 200, means average returns that I generated per year is 200, and this is of a mutual fund scheme. Okay, now this average return is 200. Does it mean that every year I got 200 return? No, there have been some years where returns have been high, there have been some years where returns have been low, somewhat like this is how the returns have been. In case of Sharpe ratio, what we do, you see, in the denominator we have standard deviation. Why we put standard deviation? Because we need to find out the per unit risk. What the the purpose of Sharpe ratio and Sortino ratio is nothing but to find out per unit risk how much return I've generated, right? And why we take standard deviation? Because standard deviation is a very good measure of risk. It tells you about the volatility, correct? If you have not watched my video on standard deviation, please watch it. Also, you will not understand anything that I'm saying here. So, coming back to the topic, we have standard deviation in the denominator because this is risk, correct? Now, in case of Sharpe ratio, what we do is that standard deviation is what? We add all of these, correct? We add every deviation from the average. Okay, so let's say this is A, this is B, C, D, E, F. In case of Sharpe ratio, the positive and the negative deviation both are taken into consideration. Okay, but in case of Sortino ratio, only this B, D, and F, the negative returns are only added. Only these negative returns are added because see, if I get higher returns than average, then it is not really risk, correct? It's not really risk, it's my own benefit only. So that is why we say that Sortino ratio is a much better representative of the risk that I've taken compared to Sharpe ratio, because in case of Sharpe ratio we take the general standard deviation, means we take the positive deviations also and the negative deviation also of the past few years, correct? But in case of Sortino ratio, see over here, we take the sum of only the negative returns, so only the bad risk we take, because the good risk is basically my benefit, right? The extra returns that I generate, so that isn't really risk, correct? That is why Sortino ratio is a better measure of risk adjusted returns compared to Sharpe ratio, because here I'm taking only the negative returns. Here I'm taking all A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, all the sum of all those, but here I'm only taking the negative returns that I get. So, for a mutual fund scheme, the Sharpe ratio and Sortino ratio will be very different. Okay. If I take this scheme only, if I calculate this scheme's Sharpe ratio, it will be a very different number. If I calculate the Sortino ratio, it will be a different number. The Sortino ratio will be greater than the Sharpe ratio. Why? Because in case of Sharpe ratio, the standard deviation that we took was the sum of A, B, C, D, all. So the standard deviation in case of Sharpe ratio will be a much greater value. In case of Sortino ratio, since we are only taking the negative deviations, so the standard deviation will be smaller. Since standard deviation occurs in the denominator, so the smaller the standard deviation, the greater will be my total ratio. If this standard deviation is smaller, then Sortino ratio will rise, right? Okay. So in case of my Sharpe ratio, what do we have? Total returns minus risk free return divided by the standard deviation, means both positive and negative. Okay, in case of Sortino ratio, total returns minus risk free return divided by only the negative standard deviations, only these things. Okay, so that is why in case of this standard deviation it will be a bigger value than this, because we are also considering this. And that is why you will see generally Sharpe ratios are smaller than Sortino ratios. Okay, and Sortino ratio is also a much better representative, because here you're only considering the bad risk, only risk that will lead to losses. But in case of Sharpe ratio, you're also considering the good. You're considering greater returns as also risk, so it's not a good representative. That's it. That's the difference between Sharpe and Sortino ratio. Thank you guys so much for watching this video.